The alarm clock buzzed at 5 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 30 years. Jake Morrison rolled out of bed, his massive frame creaking like an old barn door. At 6'8" and built like a mountain, Jake had to duck through most doorways and buy his clothes from special stores. His hands were so big that regular coffee mugs looked like toy teacups in his grip. Walking to the kitchen window, Jake looked out at his sprawling ranch in Montana. The morning mist hung low over the rolling hills, and his cattle were already stirring in the distance. This land had been his whole world for decades. Every fence post, every blade of grass, every rock on the property told a story of hard work and dedication, but something felt empty lately. Maybe it was because his wife Maria had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer had taken her away, leaving Jake alone in their big farmhouse with nothing but memories and the sound of his own footsteps echoing through empty rooms. The silence was the hardest part. Maria used to fill the house with laughter, cooking, smells, and endless chatter about her flower garden. Jake poured himself coffee from the pot that made enough for 2 people. Even though only one person drank it now, he still made too much coffee every morning, forgetting that Maria wasn't there to share it with him. Old habits die hard on a ranch where routine keeps everything running smooth. Outside, his ranch hands were already starting their day. Jake employed 12 good men who knew cattle and horses like they knew their own families. The Morrison Ranch had grown from a small family operation to one of the biggest cattle spreads in the state. They ran nearly 3,000 head of cattle across 15,000 acres of prime Montana grassland. But Jake's real pride and joy was his quarter-horse breeding program. These weren't just any horses, they were championship bloodlines worth more than most people's houses. His stallions had won prizes at every major show from Texas to Canada. The Mares produced foals that sold for tens of thousands of dollars to wealthy buyers who wanted the best horses money could buy. The problem was, Jake needed fresh blood in his breeding program. His best Mare, Rosie, was getting old. At 22, she was past her prime breeding years. In horse terms, that made her a senior citizen ready for retirement. Jake had been putting off finding a replacement for months, but he couldn't wait any longer. The spring breeding season was coming up fast. That's how Jake found himself getting ready for the monthly horse auction in Billings. He hadn't been to an auction in over a year. Usually he bought horses directly from other breeders or at private sales, but word was spreading about a special auction featuring horses from some estate sales. When wealthy horse owners passed away, their entire collections sometimes went up for auction. That's where you could find real treasures. Jake climbed into his pickup truck, a heavy-duty Ford that was one of the few vehicles that didn't make him feel like he was sitting in a sardine can. The drive to Billings would take 2 hours, giving him plenty of time to think about what kind of Mare he wanted. She needed to be young enough to produce foals for at least 10 years. She needed perfect conformation, straight legs, strong back, good muscle tone. Most importantly, she needed the right bloodlines to match with his stallions. The auction barn in Billings was buzzing with activity when Jake arrived. Horse trailers filled the parking lot, and the smell of hay and horses drifted through the air. Jake knew most of the serious buyers by sight. There was old Pete Williams, who bought horses for rich folks in Texas. Jennifer Hayes ran a training facility in Colorado and always looked for young prospects. The Martinez brothers from New Mexico were known for finding diamonds in the rough. Jake grabbed a catalog and found a seat in the bleachers. The auction wouldn't start for another hour, but he wanted to study the listings first. Horse auctions moved fast, and you had to know what you wanted before the bidding started. Miss a good horse because you were still reading the catalog, and some other buyer would snatch her up, flipping through the pages. Jake's attention stopped at lot number 47. The description read, Chestnut Mare, 6 years old, quarter horse, excellent bloodlines, trained for western pleasure and trail riding. The bloodlines caught his eye immediately. This Mare's grandfather was a stallion Jake had tried to buy years ago but couldn't afford. Her grandmother was from a line of horses known for producing national champions. What made this horse even more interesting was the note at the bottom of the listing. Special circumstances apply. buyer must be approved for welfare of animal. Jake had never seen a note like that before. Usually, if you had the money and the horse was legal to sell, that was enough. Special circumstances usually meant some kind of problem. Jake decided to walk through the barn and look at the horses before the auction started. The smart buyers always did this. Pictures in catalogs could lie, but seeing a horse in person told you everything you needed to know. A horse might look perfect in a photo but have terrible conformation when you saw her standing in a stall. The barn was long and narrow, with temporary stalls set up on both sides. Each stall had a number that matched the catalog, making it easy to find specific horses. Jake moved slowly down the aisle, his trained eye examining each animal. Some horses were clearly past their prime. Others were too young and green for what he needed. A few caught his interest, but nothing special enough to get excited about. Then he reached stall 47, and everything changed. The chestnut Mare was absolutely beautiful. She stood about 15 hands high, which was perfect for a quarter horse. Her coat gleamed like polished copper, and her muscles rippled under her skin when she moved. Everything about her said champion, from her intelligent eyes to her perfectly balanced stance. Jake had been around horses his whole life, and he could spot quality from 50 feet away. This Mare had it in spades, but what really caught Jake's attention wasn't the horse. It was the girl standing next to her. She looked to be about 14 years old, small and thin, with long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were clean but obviously old and worn. She stood with one hand resting on the Mare's neck, her fingers moving in small, gentle circles. The horse seemed completely relaxed, which was unusual for auction day. Most horses were nervous in the strange environment, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and smells. What struck Jake most was how the girl's eyes seemed to look right through him without really seeing him. There was something different about the way she held her head, the way she listened to everything around her with intense focus. She moved her hands over the horse with a certainty that came from long practice, like she was reading a book written in a language only she understood. The Mare responded to the girl's touch like they shared some secret communication. When the girl whispered something too quiet for Jake to hear, the horse lowered her head and nuzzled the girl's shoulder. It was the kind of bond Jake had seen between cowboys and their favorite horses after years of working together. But this girl was just a kid. Jake stood there watching, fascinated by what he was seeing. This wasn't just a girl and a horse. This was a partnership built on trust and understanding that went deeper than anything he'd witnessed in 30 years of working with horses. Whatever the special circumstances were, Jake had a feeling they were about to make this auction a lot more interesting than he'd expected. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something important was happening in stall 47. The connection between the girl and the Mare was unlike anything he'd seen before. He found himself walking back to that stall 3 more times before the auction started, each time noticing new details that made him more curious. The girl never seemed to look directly at anything, but she knew exactly where everything was. When someone walked past the stall, she would turn her head slightly toward the sound of footsteps. Her hands never stopped moving over the horse, checking the Mare's legs, feeling along her back, running fingers through her mane. It was like she was reading the horse's entire story through touch alone. Other buyers stopped by the stall too, but something strange happened every time. The beautiful chestnut Mare, who had been calm and gentle with the girl, would suddenly become tense and difficult when strangers approached. Her ears would pin back and she'd move away from the stall door. A couple of experienced horse traders tried to get a closer look, but the Mare wouldn't let them near her. "She's usually not like this," the girl said quietly to one frustrated buyer. "She just needs time to trust new people." The buyer shook his head and walked away, muttering something about difficult horses not being worth the trouble. Jake watched this happen twice more before the auction started. Each time, potential buyers left after seeing the Mare's behavior. Only with the girl did the horse stay calm and friendly. The auction barn filled up as showtime approached. Jake found a good seat where he could see both the auctioneer and the entrance where horses would be brought in for bidding. The air buzzed with conversation as buyers studied their catalogs and made final decisions about which horses they wanted. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our monthly horse auction." The auctioneer's voice boomed through the speakers. "We've got some exceptional animals for you today, including several from estate sales. Let's start with lot number 1. Jake half listened as the first few horses came and went. A young gelding sold for $1,200 to a local riding instructor. An older Mare went to a family looking for a trail horse. Prices were reasonable, which was good news for someone looking to make a serious purchase. As the lot numbers climbed higher, Jake found himself getting nervous. He'd been to hundreds of auctions over the years, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was because he hadn't bought a horse in so long, or maybe it was because he couldn't stop thinking about that girl and her mysterious connection to the chestnut Mare. "Lot number 47, the auctioneer announced, and Jake's attention snapped back to the present. "This is a special one, folks. 6-year-old chestnut quarter-horse Mare, excellent bloodlines, well-trained and ready to work." The girl led the Mare into the auction ring, and Jake could see the difference immediately. In the stall, surrounded by familiar smells and sounds, the Mare had been relaxed. Here, under bright lights with hundreds of strangers staring at her, she was nervous. Her ears swiveled constantly, and she took quick, shallow breaths, but the girl seemed to sense every bit of the Mare's anxiety. She kept one hand on the horse's neck, whispering words too quiet for anyone else to hear. Slowly, the Mare began to relax. Her breathing deepened and her ears stopped moving so frantically. "Now, folks," the auctioneer continued, "this Mare comes with some special circumstances that I need to explain before we start bidding." A murmur went through the crowd. Special circumstances at horse auctions usually meant health problems or legal issues. Jake leaned forward, suddenly worried that his interest in this horse might be wasted. The previous owner, Mrs. Chun, passed away last month. In her will, she left very specific instructions about this Mare named Bella, the horse, and this young Lady Lily must stay together. Mrs. Chun was Lily's legal guardian, and she made it clear that whoever buys Bella must also provide a home for Lily. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. Jake could hear people around him whispering about the unusual situation. Some buyers were already shaking their heads and crossing the horse off their lists. Taking care of a teenage girl was way more responsibility than most people wanted when they came to buy a horse. Lily has been Bella's primary trainer and caretaker for the past 3 years, the auctioneer explained. Due to circumstances beyond her control, Lily lost her sight in an accident, but as you can see, she has developed an extraordinary ability to work with horses. Now Jake understood why the girl moved the way she did, why she listened so carefully to everything around her, why her hands never stopped exploring the world through touch. She was blind, but she knew that horse better than most people knew. Their own family members. "The estate lawyers have made it clear that this is a package deal," the auctioneer continued. "Whoever buys Bella agrees to provide appropriate housing and care for Lily as well. We have references and background checks available for serious buyers." Jake watched as more potential bidders lost interest. A horse was one thing, but a teenage girl was a huge responsibility. Most of the buyers here were business people looking for animals to add to their breeding programs or training facilities. They weren't prepared to become guardians to a blind teenager. "Let's start the bidding at $2,000, the auctioneer called out. Silence filled the auction barn. Jake could see people looking around, waiting for someone else to make the first bid. The Mare was clearly worth much more than $2,000 based on her bloodlines alone, but the package deal was scaring everyone away. "Do I hear 2,000? The auctioneer repeated. Jake raised his hand. He wasn't sure why he did it, but something about the whole situation pulled at his heart. Maybe it was because he understood what it felt like to lose family. Maybe it was because he could see how much that girl loved her horse. Or maybe it was just because the Mare was exactly what his breeding program needed. "Thank you, sir. I have 2,000. "Do I hear 2,500? Another long silence. Jake looked around the barn and realized that most buyers had already mentally moved on to the next lot. A few people were still watching, but nobody else seemed interested in bidding. Going once at 2,000, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Jake's heart started beating faster. Was he really about to buy? Not just a horse, but responsibility for a teenage girl he'd never met? His ranch was no place for a blind kid. It was dangerous enough for people who could see everything clearly, but then he looked at Lily standing in the ring with Bella. The girl's face showed no fear, even though her future was being decided by strangers. She just kept stroking the Mare's neck, whispering quiet words of comfort. The horse trusted her completely, and Jake could see why. There was something special about this girl, something that went way beyond her disability. Sold to bidder number 68 for $2,000? The auctioneer announced. Jake looked down at the number pinned to his shirt and realized what he'd just done. He'd come to buy a horse and somehow ended up responsible for a blind teenager. As Lily led Bella out of the ring, she turned her head in his direction, as if she somehow knew exactly where he was sitting. For just a moment, Jake wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Then he remembered what his wife, Maria, used to say about following your heart instead of your head. Maybe this was one of those times when the heart knew something the head couldn't figure out. After the auction ended, Jake sat in the bleachers for a few extra minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He'd walked into that barn planning to buy a horse, and now he was responsible for a blind teenager named Lily. The paperwork would take a while to complete, which gave him time to really watch this girl work with Bella. Jake made his way back to the holding area where auction winners collected their purchases. Lily was in a small pen with Bella, and what Jake saw there made him stop in his tracks. The girl moved around the horse with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't see. She wasn't feeling her way carefully or moving slowly like Jake expected. Instead, she walked around Bella like she had a perfect map of everything in her head. "Easy, girl, I know this place is scary," Lily whispered to the Mare. Her voice was so soft that Jake had to strain to hear it. "But we're going home with someone new today. We'll figure it out together, just like we always do." Bella's ears were forward, listening to every word. The horse's entire body language showed trust and relaxation. Jake had seen thousands of horses in his lifetime, and he knew when an animal felt safe. This Mare felt completely secure with Lily, even in the stressful environment of the auction barn. Jake stepped closer to the pen, his boots making noise on the concrete floor. Lily's head turned toward the sound immediately, and she seemed to know exactly where he was standing without anyone telling her. "You must be the man who bought us," she said simply. There was no fear in her voice, just a quiet acceptance of whatever was about to happen. "That's right," Jake replied, surprised by how calm she seemed. "I'm Jake Morrison. I run a ranch about 2 hours from here." Lily nodded and continued running her hands along Bella's legs. Jake watched, fascinated, as her fingers moved with the precision of a skilled veterinarian. She was checking the Mare's tendons, feeling for any heat or swelling that might indicate injury. Her touch was so gentle that Bella didn't even shift. Her weight. "She's got a small cut on her left front leg," Lily said without looking up. "It's not deep, but it happened yesterday when some kid was teasing her with a stick through the fence. The cut is clean and healing well, but you should keep an eye on it for a few days." Jake moved around to look at the leg Lily was examining. Sure enough, there was a small scratch about 3 inches long on the horse's cannon bone. The cut was so minor that Jake might have missed it completely during a normal examination. It was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. "How did you find that so fast?" Jake asked, genuinely impressed. "I know every inch of this horse," Lily replied matter-of-factly. "When you can't see, you learn to notice things through touch that other people miss. Bella tells me everything through her body language, her breathing, the way she holds her muscles." As if to prove the point, Lily placed both hands on Bella's sides and stood quietly for a moment. "She's a little dehydrated from being nervous today, and her stomach is empty. She hasn't eaten much since this morning because all the activity made her too anxious to eat properly." Jake looked at the Mare more carefully. Now that Lily mentioned it, he could see subtle signs that supported her observations. Bella's flanks were slightly tucked up, indicating hunger. Her skin seemed a bit less elastic than it should be, which could mean mild dehydration. These were things a good horseman might notice, but it would take several minutes of careful examination. Lily had figured it all out in seconds through touch alone. "That's incredible," Jake said honestly. "I've been working with horses for 30 years, and it would take me 10 minutes to notice what you just found in 30 seconds. For the first time since he'd met her, Lily smiled. It was a small smile, but it changed her entire face. "Mrs. Chun used to say that losing my sight gave me a different kind of vision. I didn't believe her at first, but I guess she was right." Jake wanted to ask about Mrs. Chun and what had happened to Lily's parents, but something told him this wasn't the right time. The girl had been through enough changes for one day, without having to relive painful memories for a stranger. Instead, Jake decided to test Lily's abilities a bit more. "What can you tell me about the horse in the pen next to us?" Lily tilted her head and listened for a moment. The horse Jake was referring to was a bay gelding that had sold earlier in the auction. From where they stood, the horse was about 15 feet away and partially hidden by a metal panel. "It's a gelding, probably around 10 years old," Lily said after a few seconds. "He's favoring his right hind leg just slightly, nothing serious, but enough to notice. He's been worked hard recently. I can smell the dried sweat in his coat. And he's missing his left front shoe." Jake stared at her in amazement, then walked over to look at the bay horse. Everything Lily had said was absolutely correct. The gelding was indeed favoring his right hind leg when he walked. His coat showed the telltale signs of recent hard work, and sure enough, his left front hoof was bare where a horseshoe should have been. "How in the world did you know about the missing shoe?" Jake asked when he returned to Lily's side. "The sound his hooves make when he walks," Lily explained. 3 shod hooves and 1 bare hoof create a different rhythm. It's like listening to someone walk when they're wearing 1 high heel and 1 flat shoe. Jake shook his head in wonder. This girl had developed senses that seemed almost superhuman. She was reading information from the environment that most people couldn't detect even when they were looking directly at it. "Can you tell me about any other horses?" Jake asked, now completely fascinated by Lily's abilities. Lily was quiet for a moment, concentrating on the sounds and smells around them. "The gray Mare 3 pens down is pregnant," she said confidently. "Probably about 4 months along. Her breathing pattern is different, and she moves more carefully than a Mare normally would. The black stallion near the entrance is agitated, because there's a Mare in heat somewhere in this barn. He keeps calling to her every few minutes. And that paint horse over by the far wall has a respiratory infection. His breathing is slightly labored, and I can hear a small wheeze when he exhales." Jake spent the next hour testing Lily's observations, and every single one proved to be accurate. The gray Mare's owner confirmed she was indeed pregnant. The black stallion was responding to a Mare that had just come into season, and the paint horse's owner admitted the animal had been fighting a cold for the past week. By the time they loaded Bella into Jake's horse trailer for the trip home, Jake realized he hadn't just bought a horse and inherited a responsibility. He had somehow acquired a partner with abilities that could revolutionize his entire ranch operation. This blind girl could see things about horses that escaped even the most experienced professionals. As they drove through the Montana countryside toward Jake's ranch, Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat with her window down, listening to the world go by. Jake found himself wondering what else this remarkable girl might be able to teach him about the animals he thought he knew so well. The 2-hour drive back to Jake's ranch was the quietest ride of his life. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her head turned slightly toward the open window, listening to sounds that Jake couldn't even identify. Every few minutes she would nod slightly or tilt her head like she was having a conversation with the world outside. Jake kept stealing glances at her, still trying to process what he'd gotten himself into. In all his years of ranching, he'd never imagined bringing home a teenage girl, especially one with such unique circumstances. His ranch was built for tough men doing dangerous work, not for a blind kid who probably needed special care and constant supervision. "The road changes to gravel in about half a mile," Lily said suddenly. Breaking the silence, Jake looked ahead and saw nothing but smooth asphalt stretching into the distance. How do you know that? The sound of the truck tires changes when we're getting close to different road surfaces, she explained. Plus, I can smell dust in the air that comes from gravel roads. Sure enough, exactly half a mile later, Jake turned onto the gravel road that led to his ranch. The sound of tires on loose stones filled the cab, and dust began swirling behind them. Jake had driven this route thousands of times, but he'd never noticed the subtle signs that announced the road change before it happened. As they pulled into the ranch yard, Jake saw his crew gathering near the barn. Word traveled fast in ranch country, and he knew his men were curious about what he'd brought home from the auction. They were expecting a horse, not a horse and a teenage girl, Tommy Rodriguez. Jake's foreman walked over to the truck as they parked. Tommy had worked for Jake for 15 years and wasn't easily surprised, but his eyebrows shot up when he saw Lily getting out of the passenger seat. "Boss, when you said you were buying a Mare, you didn't mention she came with a passenger," Tommy said, trying to keep his voice light. "Long story, Tommy. This is Lily, and she comes with the horse. It's a package deal." Jake could see the concern in Tommy's eyes. The ranch was no place for kids, especially one who couldn't see the countless dangers that surrounded them every day. There were deep irrigation ditches, electric fences, bulls that weighed 2,000 pounds, and machinery that could crush a person in seconds. "Jake, with all due respect," Tommy said quietly, "this place could be dangerous for someone who can't see where they're going." Lily had been listening to every word while she helped unload Bella from the trailer. "I appreciate your concern," she said politely, "but I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I'm not planning to be anyone's burden." The way she said it made Jake's chest tighten. There was a strength in her voice, but also a weariness that no 14-year-old should carry. She'd obviously heard people worry about her being a burden many times before. "Nobody said anything about being a burden," Jake replied firmly. "Tommy's just looking out for everyone's safety. That's his job." Over the next few hours, Jake learned more about Lily's story. She'd been bounced around the foster care system for 3 years, ever since the car accident that killed her parents and took her sight. Some families tried to help, but most weren't prepared for the challenges of caring for a blind teenager. The only constant in her life had been Bella and Mrs. Chun, an elderly neighbor who had become her legal guardian. Mrs. Chun had owned a small horse boarding facility where Lily spent every day after school and all weekend. The old woman recognized something special in Lily's connection with horses and encouraged her to develop her skills. When Mrs. Chen died suddenly of a heart attack, Lily faced the prospect of being separated from Bella and sent to another foster home. "Mrs. Chun made sure in her will that Bella and I would stay together," Lily explained as she settled the Mare into a stall in Jake's barn. "She knew that losing Bella would be like losing my family all over again." Jake watched Lily work with practiced efficiency. She moved around the stall like she'd been in that exact space 100 times before. Within minutes, she had memorized the location of the water bucket, feed trough, and hay net. Her hands explored every surface, creating a mental map that would keep her safe. "The latch on this stall door sticks a little," she observed, "and there's a loose board about 3 feet up on the back wall. It's not dangerous, but it might need fixing eventually." Jake checked both things and found she was absolutely right. The latch did stick slightly, and there was indeed a loose board exactly where she'd indicated. These were minor issues that he'd been meaning to address for weeks, but kept forgetting about that evening. Jake showed Lily to the guest room in his house. It was a simple room with a bed, dresser, and small desk that Maria had used for sewing projects. Lily explored the space carefully, her hands mapping every piece of furniture and every corner. "This room feels peaceful," she said after completing her exploration. "Someone who loved beautiful things used to spend time here." Jake's throat tightened. "My wife Maria used to sew in here. She made quilts and curtains for the whole house." "She had good taste," Lily said simply. "I can tell from the way everything is arranged. Things are where they should be, not just thrown together." That night, Jake lay awake wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Taking care of a ranch was hard enough without adding a teenage girl to the mix. Lily seemed remarkably independent, but she was still just a kid. What if she got hurt? What if his insurance didn't cover accidents involving someone who wasn't family? What if the state decided his ranch wasn't a suitable place for a foster child? But then he remembered watching Lily with Bella at the auction. The girl had lost everything, her parents, her sight, her home, yet she still found ways to care for others. She'd been through more hardship in 3 years than most people faced in a lifetime, and she was still standing strong. Jake's wife Maria had always believed that some people came into your life for a reason, even when that reason wasn't immediately clear. She used to say that the heart could see things the mind couldn't understand. Maybe Lily was one of those people. The next morning, Jake found Lily already in the barn, grooming Bella with long, gentle strokes. Several of his ranch hands were standing nearby, watching in amazement as she worked. She moved around the horse with such confidence that it was easy to forget she couldn't see. "Boss," Tommy said, pulling Jake aside, "I've been working with horses for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what that girl can do." She knew that Gray Gelding in stall 12 had a stone bruise on his front hoof just by listening to him walk. Turned out she was right. Jake nodded, not surprised. He was beginning to understand that Lily's disability had forced her to develop abilities that went far beyond normal human senses. She didn't just work with horses, she communicated with them in ways that seemed almost magical. "Maybe having her here won't be such a problem after all," Tommy continued. "Might even be helpful if you ask me." As Jake watched Lily continue her work with Bella, he realized that his biggest challenge wouldn't be taking care of her. It would be convincing her that she belonged somewhere permanent, with people who valued her for who she was rather than seeing her as a burden to bear. Within just 3 days of arriving at the ranch, Lily had surprised everyone by creating a mental map of the entire property that was more detailed than some written surveys. Jake discovered this by accident when he was explaining the ranch layout to her over breakfast. "The main barn is about 200 yards southeast of the house," Jake started, pointing in the general direction even though he knew she couldn't see his gesture. "Actually, it's exactly 187 steps from the front porch," Lily corrected gently. "And it's more south-southeast than straight southeast? There's a slight slope in the ground that curves the path about 15 degrees to the left." Jake stared at her in amazement. He'd lived on this ranch for 30 years and never thought to count the exact steps between buildings. "How do you know all that?" "I walked every path yesterday evening while you were checking the cattle," Lily explained. "I count steps automatically. Now it helps me navigate safely. Plus, I can feel slopes and changes in terrain through my feet." What Jake didn't know was that Lily had been awake until nearly midnight, carefully exploring the ranch grounds. She'd mapped out not just the main buildings, but every fence line, every gate, every water trough, and every major landmark. Her system was incredibly detailed. She knew that the gate to the horse pasture creaked on the third swing, that there was a loose stone in the path near the equipment shed, and that the old oak tree by the pond had a low branch exactly 5 feet off the ground. By the end of her first week, Lily was moving around the ranch with such confidence that newcomers couldn't tell she was blind. She knew which horses were, where just by their sounds and smells. She could identify individual cows by their breathing patterns and the sound of their hoofbeats. Most remarkably, she began noticing problems that had escaped everyone else's attention. "The black stallion in paddock 3 is developing a small abscess in his left front hoof," she told Tommy one morning. "It's not painful yet, but it will be if you don't treat it soon." Tommy was skeptical. The stallion, named Thunder, was one of Jake's most valuable breeding horses. He'd been examined by the veterinarian just 2 weeks earlier and given a clean bill of health. The horse showed no signs of lameness or discomfort. "How can you possibly know that?" Tommy asked. "That horse is moving fine. His weight distribution is slightly off," Lily explained patiently. "When he stands still, he shifts just a tiny bit more weight to his right front leg than he should. And when he walks, his left front hoof hits the ground with slightly less force than normal. The difference is so small that you'd never notice it just by watching, but I can hear it. Tommy remained doubtful, but Jake had learned to trust Lily's observations. He called the veterinarian, Dr. Williams, who had been treating horses in the area for over 20 years. Dr. Williams arrived that afternoon with his usual equipment and skeptical expression. "Let me guess," Dr. Williams said with a slight smile. "The new girl thinks something's wrong with Thunder?" "Just humor us, Doc," Jake replied. "She's been right about everything else so far." Dr. Williams conducted a thorough examination of Thunder's left front hoof. At first, he found nothing unusual. The hoof looked healthy, felt normal to the touch, and showed no obvious signs of problems. But then he used a hoof tester, a specialized tool that applies pressure to different parts of the hoof to detect sensitivity. When he squeezed a specific spot on the sole of Thunder's hoof, the stallion immediately pulled his leg away and showed clear signs of discomfort. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Williams muttered. "There is something here. Feels like the very beginning of an abscess. Another week or two, and this horse would have been seriously lame." He looked at Lily with new respect. "Young lady, how did you detect something that I couldn't find without special equipment?" "Horses talk to us all the time," Lily said simply. "Most people just don't know how to listen." Word of Lily's diagnostic abilities spread quickly through the local ranching community. Within a month, neighbors were calling Jake to ask if that girl of yours could take a look at their horses. She diagnosed a respiratory infection in the Martinez family's prize, Mare, 2 days before any symptoms became visible. She detected early signs of colic in old Pete, Wilson's gelding, and probably saved the horse's life by recommending immediate veterinary care. But Lily's talents went beyond diagnosing health problems. She had an uncanny ability to predict horse behavior and prevent accidents before they happened. One afternoon, she was walking past the breaking pen where Tommy was working with a young Mustang that had been rescued from the wild. "Tommy, you need to stop what you're doing right now," Lily called out urgently. Tommy paused, looking confused. The Mustang seemed calm enough, standing quietly while Tommy held a lead rope. "What's wrong? Everything looks fine." "That horse is about to bolt," Lily insisted. "His breathing just changed, and I can hear his heart rate increasing. Something spooked him, probably a sound you can't hear yet." Tommy was about to argue when a low-flying helicopter appeared over the ridge, heading toward the ranch. The sound of the rotor blades was still barely audible to human ears, but the Mustang had heard it long before anyone else. The horse's eyes went wide, and he exploded into action, trying to escape the unfamiliar noise. Because Tommy had listened to Lily's warning, he was prepared for the Mustang's reaction. Instead of being caught off guard and possibly trampled, he was able to safely release the lead rope and get out of the way as the horse panicked. "How did you know that was coming?" Tommy asked, breathing hard from the close call. "Horses hear things we can't," Lily explained. "They can detect sounds and vibrations that are beyond human range. When you spend enough time really listening to them, you learn to read the signs." Jake began taking Lily with him when he checked on the cattle herds. At first, his ranch hands thought this was a bad idea. Cattle could be unpredictable and dangerous, especially the bulls. But Lily proved that her abilities worked with cows just as well as with horses. She could identify sick animals in a herd of 300 cattle just by listening to their breathing patterns as Jake drove slowly past in his pickup truck. She detected a cow with mastitis by the subtle change in the sound of her movement. She even warned Jake about a bull that was becoming aggressive before the animal showed any visible signs of agitation. "That big Angus bull near the water tank is getting territorial," she told Jake one afternoon. "His breathing pattern changed when we got within 50 yards of him. We should move the truck before he decides to charge." Jake looked at the bull, who appeared to be peacefully drinking water. But he'd learned to trust Lily's instincts completely. He backed the truck away from the tank, and sure enough, the bull lifted his head, snorted aggressively, and began pawing the ground. The ranch hands went from being skeptical of Lily to being amazed by her abilities. They started asking her opinion before making decisions about animal care and ranch operations. She became Jake's unofficial consultant on everything from equipment maintenance to weather prediction. "Boss," Tommy said one evening after Lily had prevented another potential accident, "I've been thinking, that girl doesn't have a disability, she's got a superpower." 3 months after Lily arrived at the ranch, Jake found her sitting alone on the front porch steps one evening, tears streaming down her face. It was the first time he'd seen her cry, and it caught him completely off guard. For someone who handled every challenge with quiet strength, seeing her breakdown was like watching a mountain crumble. "Lily, what's wrong?" Jake asked, settling his large frame onto the step beside her. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be caught in a vulnerable moment. "I was just thinking about my parents," she said quietly. "Today would have been my mom's birthday. She would have been 42. Jake felt his chest tighten. In all the weeks of watching Lily amaze everyone with her abilities, he'd almost forgotten that she was still just a 14-year-old girl who had lost everything that mattered to her. Her strength and independence had made it easy to overlook the grief she carried. "Tell me about her," Jake said gently. Lily's voice was soft as she shared memories. Her mother had been a veterinarian who specialized in large animals. Her father worked as a ranch foreman for a wealthy family outside of Billings. They'd planned to save enough money to buy their own small ranch someday, where they could raise horses and cattle together as a family. "Mom was teaching me everything about animal medicine," Lily continued. "She said I had natural instincts that couldn't be taught in school. We spent every weekend visiting ranches together, and she showed me how to examine animals, how to spot problems early, how to read their body language." "That explains why you're so good with horses and cattle," Jake observed. "After the accident, everyone told me I'd have to give up my dream of becoming a veterinarian," Lily said, fresh tears forming in her eyes. "They said blind people can't do that kind of work. Foster families meant well, but they kept trying to steer me toward things like music or computer programming. Safe things that wouldn't put me in danger." Jake understood now why Lily had seemed so defensive when she first arrived. She'd spent 3 years having people tell her what she couldn't do instead of recognizing what she could do better than anyone else. "What do you think your parents would say if they could see you now?" Jake asked. Lily smiled through her tears. "Mom would probably say, 'I told you so.' She always believed I could do anything I set my mind to. Dad would be amazed that I can identify individual cows in a herd of 300 just by listening to them breathe." Over the following weeks, Jake and Lily began spending more time together, sharing stories about their lost loved ones. Jake told her about Maria, how they'd met at a county fair when she was showing her family's prize-winning quilts. Maria had been the one who convinced him to expand the ranch's horse breeding program, saying that beautiful animals deserved beautiful surroundings. "She sounds like she was a lot like my mom," Lily said one evening as they walked through the horse pastures. "Strong women who weren't afraid to dream big." "They would have liked each other," Jake agreed. "Maria always said that real family isn't about blood relations. It's about people who choose to love and support each other no matter what." As trust grew between them, Lily began opening up about her deepest fears. She worried that she'd never be truly independent, that she'd always need someone to take care of her. She was terrified of being a burden on Jake the way she felt she'd been on her foster families. "I know you didn't plan on having a kid around when you bought Bella," she said one day while they were working with a difficult young stallion. "I keep waiting for you to realize this was a mistake and send me somewhere else." Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "Lily, in 3 months, you've probably saved me more money in veterinary bills and prevented more accidents than I could count. You're not a burden. You're the best ranch hand I've ever had." "But I'm not really a ranch hand," Lily protested. "I'm just a foster kid who happens to be good with animals." "No," Jake said firmly. "You're a young woman with extraordinary abilities who deserves to chase her dreams. And if becoming a veterinarian is your dream, then we're going to figure out how to make that happen." For the first time since her parents died, Lily began to believe that her future might hold possibilities instead of just limitations. Jake enrolled her in the local high school, where she struggled with some subjects but excelled in biology and animal science. Her teachers were amazed by her practical knowledge of animal health and behavior. Jake also began teaching Lily the business side of ranch management. He showed her how to keep records of breeding schedules, track veterinary expenses, and plan for seasonal changes in cattle management. Lily absorbed everything like a sponge, asking thoughtful questions that showed she understood not just the mechanics of ranching, but the strategic thinking behind successful operations. "Why do you breed the horses in early spring instead of fall?" she asked one day while they reviewed breeding records. "Because foals born in spring have all summer to grow strong before their first winter," Jake explained. "It gives them the best chance of survival and healthy development." "That makes sense," Lily nodded. "But what about the Mares? Doesn't being pregnant through winter put extra stress on them?" Jake paused, impressed by her insight. It was exactly the kind of question that separated good ranchers from great ones, thinking about the welfare of the animals from every angle, not just the most obvious considerations. Together, they developed new training methods for horses that relied more on energy and communication than traditional visual cues. Lily taught Jake to pay attention to subtle signs he'd been missing for years: the slight change in a horse's breathing that indicated confusion, the tension in muscles that suggested fear, the almost imperceptible shift in weight that showed readiness to learn. "Most people try to dominate horses," Lily explained as she worked with a young Mare that had been difficult for others to handle. "But horses are herd animals. They respond better to leadership than to force. You have to convince them that you're trustworthy, not just that you're stronger." Jake watched in amazement as the previously stubborn Mare began responding to Lily's gentle guidance. Within an hour, the horse was following basic commands and showing signs of genuine trust. It was the kind of a breakthrough that usually took weeks of traditional training methods. "How do you do that?" Jake asked. "I listen to what she's telling." "Me," Lily replied simply. "Every horse has a different personality, different fears, different ways of learning. When you can't see their expressions, you have to rely on their energy and body language. In some ways, that gives you a clearer picture of who they really are." As winter approached, Jake realized that somewhere along the way, the ranch had stopped feeling empty. The house that had echoed with loneliness now buzzed with conversation about horses, cattle, and dreams for the future. Lily's presence had brought life back to a place that had been just existing since Maria's death. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace reviewing plans for spring breeding season, Jake looked at Lily and saw not the broken foster child who had arrived 6 months earlier, but a confident young woman who belonged exactly where she was. The phone call came on a cold February morning that would change everything for Lily. Jake was in his office reviewing feed orders when his neighbor, Robert Hayes, called with desperation in his voice. Robert owned the largest horse operation in the county, with over 200 animals worth millions of dollars. "Jake, I need your help," Robert said, his voice tight with worry. "It's about Storm King." Storm King was Robert's prize stallion, a magnificent black Arabian worth more than most people's houses. The horse had been the cornerstone of Robert's breeding program for 8 years, producing champions that sold for enormous sums at auction. "What's wrong with him?" Jake asked, already sensing this wasn't a routine call. "That's the problem. Nobody knows," Robert replied. 3 weeks ago, Storm King was perfectly normal. Then he started acting strange. He won't let anyone near him, he stopped eating properly, and he keeps pacing in his stall like he's in pain. But here's the weird part. 3 different veterinarians have examined him thoroughly, including Dr. Williams, x-rays, blood tests, physical exams, everything. They can't find anything wrong with him. Jake frowned. Dr. Williams was the best large animal veterinarian in the region. If he couldn't find the problem, it was either very well hidden or something unusual was happening. "The horse is getting worse every day," Robert continued. "He's losing weight, and yesterday he tried to bite his handler, something he's never done before. I'm desperate, Jake. I've heard stories about your foster daughter and her abilities with animals." Would you consider bringing her over to take a look? Jake glanced out his office window and saw Lily in the barn, working with one of their young horses. Over the past 8 months, her reputation had spread throughout the ranching community. People called her everything from the horse whisperer to that girl who can see with her hands. Some of the stories were exaggerated, but Jake knew her abilities were real. "Let me talk to Lily," Jake said. "If she's willing, we'll come over this afternoon." When Jake explained the situation to Lily, her expression grew serious. She'd heard of Storm King. Every horse person in the county knew about the famous stallion. The idea of examining such a valuable animal was both exciting and intimidating. "What if I can't help?" Lily asked. "What if whatever's wrong is beyond what I can detect?" "Then at least Robert will know he tried everything," Jake replied. "But I have a feeling you might notice something the veterinarians missed." They arrived at Robert's ranch 2 hours later. The haze operation was impressive: pristine white fences, immaculate barns, and horses that looked like they'd stepped out of magazines. Robert met them at the main barn, his face showing the strain of 3 weeks of worry. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate this," Robert said as he led them toward Storm King's stall. "That horse represents 15 years of careful breeding. Decisions, if something happens to him." He didn't finish the sentence, but Jake understood. Losing Storm King wouldn't just be emotionally devastating, it could bankrupt Robert's breeding program. As they approached the stallion's stall, Jake could see why Robert was so concerned. Storm King stood in the far corner, his head lowered and his body language showing clear distress. The magnificent horse that had once commanded attention with his proud bearing now looked defeated and miserable. "Has anyone been able to get close to him lately?" Lily asked. "Only to give him food and water," Robert replied. "And even then, he pins his ears back and threatens to bite. It's like he's become a completely different horse." Lily stood quietly outside the stall for several minutes, just listening. Jake watched her face, recognizing the intense concentration she showed when she was processing information that others couldn't detect. Her head tilted slightly, and she seemed to be cataloging every sound the horse made. "His breathing is very shallow," Lily observed, "and irregular. He's definitely in pain, but it's not the kind of pain that comes from an injury or illness." "What do you mean?" Robert asked. "It's more like discomfort that comes from something foreign in his environment," Lily explained. "Can I get closer to him?" Robert looked nervous. "Lily, this horse has been dangerous lately. I don't want you to get hurt." "I'll be careful," Lily assured him. "But I need to be near him to understand what's wrong." Slowly, Lily approached the stall door. Storm King's ears immediately pinned back, and he moved farther into the corner. But instead of forcing the interaction, Lily simply stood still and began speaking in a voice so soft that Jake could barely hear her. "Easy, big guy," she whispered. "I know something's bothering you. I'm here to help, not to hurt you." For 10 minutes, Lily stood motionless, continuing her quiet conversation with the stallion. Gradually, Storm King's ears began to relax. His breathing became less labored, and he stopped shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. "That's incredible," Robert whispered to Jake. "He's been agitated for weeks, and she's calming him down just by talking." Finally, Storm King took a tentative step toward the front of the stall. Lily slowly extended her hand, letting the horse decide whether to approach. After another few minutes, the stallion stretched his neck forward and sniffed her fingers. "Good boy," Lily murmured. "Now, let's figure out what's been making you so uncomfortable." With infinite patience, Lily began examining the horse. Her hands moved over his body with the precision of a master diagnostician, checking for heat, swelling, or tension that might indicate problems. Storm King stood quietly, seemingly relieved to have someone who understood his distress. After examining his legs, back, and neck, Lily moved to the horse's head. Her fingers traced along his jaw, behind his ears, and around his nostrils. Suddenly, she stopped and frowned. "There's something here," she said quietly. Her fingers were exploring the area just inside Storm King's left nostril. "It feels like ... Wait, let me check the right side too." She moved to the horse's right nostril and repeated her examination. "Yes, there's definitely something wrong here." Robert, do you have a flashlight? Robert quickly found a powerful flashlight and handed it to Jake, who aimed the beam where Lily indicated. At first, neither man could see anything unusual. The inside of Storm King's nostril looked normal. Look deeper, Lily instructed, about 2 inches up on the left side. Jake adjusted the angle of the light, and suddenly he saw it, a small, dark object lodged high in the horse's nasal passage. It was so small and positioned in such a way that it would be almost impossible to spot during a normal examination. What is that? Robert asked, squinting into the light. Lily's fingers were still exploring gently around the object. It feels like a thorn or a piece of sharp wood, she said. It's been there for a while, long enough for the tissue around it to become inflamed. Robert's face went pale. A thorn? How is that possible? Storm King likes to eat from the low branches of that old hawthorn tree in his paddock, Lily explained. Hawthorn trees have very sharp thorns that can break off easily. He probably got this stuck in his nostril weeks ago while reaching for leaves. The mystery was solved, but the solution was delicate. The thorn was positioned in a way that would require careful extraction to avoid pushing it deeper or causing more damage. Dr. Williams was called, and within an hour he arrived with specialized equipment designed for exactly this type of problem. Young lady, Dr. Williams said to Lily after successfully removing the thorn, in 30 years of veterinary practice, I have never seen anyone diagnose a problem that's subtle without any equipment. That thorn was causing constant irritation and pain, but it was positioned so that our normal examination procedures couldn't detect it. Robert was practically speechless with relief and gratitude. Storm King's transformation was immediate. Within hours, he was eating normally and showing his old, confident personality. Lily, Robert said as they prepared to leave, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved not just my horse, but my entire breeding program. Word of Lily's success with Storm King spread like wildfire through the horse community. Within a week, Jake was fielding calls from horse owners across 3 states, all wanting the miracle girl to examine their animals. Lily had gone from being a foster child with a disability to being one of the most sought-after horse diagnosticians in the region. 2 years after that first auction day, Jake stood in the back of the high school auditorium, watching Lily walk across the stage to receive her diploma as valedictorian of her graduating class. His massive frame was squeezed into his best suit, and he had to wipe tears from his eyes as the principal announced her name. Lily Morrison, graduating with highest honors, accepted to Colorado State University's veterinary program with a full scholarship. The applause was thunderous. Half the audience seemed to know Lily personally, ranchers whose horses she'd helped, classmates who'd watched her excel despite every challenge, and teachers who'd been amazed by her determination and intelligence. Jake clapped until his hands hurt, pride swelling in his chest like a balloon ready to burst. Morrison. She'd been a Morrison for 8 months now, ever since the adoption papers were finalized. Jake remembered the day he'd asked her if she wanted him to legally adopt her. They'd been sitting on the front porch after a long day of working with horses, and Lily had gotten very quiet. Are you sure? She'd asked softly. Adopting me means you're stuck with me forever. No more foster homes, no more temporary arrangements, just ... Domley. Lily, Jake had replied, you've been family since the day you showed me how to really listen to horses. Making it legal is just paperwork. The transformation in Lily over those 2 years had been remarkable to witness. The scared, defensive teenager who'd arrived with Bella had grown into a confident young woman who knew exactly what she wanted from life. She'd not only excelled in school but had revolutionized the ranch's horse training program, making it famous throughout the region. Their ranch was now known as Morrison Ranch, home of natural horsemanship, and they had a waiting list of horse owners wanting to send their problem animals for Lily's special training methods. She'd developed techniques that worked with horses' natural instincts instead of fighting against them, creating partnerships built on trust rather than dominance. The secret, Lily always told visitors who came to watch her work, is remembering that horses are individuals with their own personalities, fears, and ways of learning. When you can't see their faces, you learn to read their hearts instead. Jake's favorite memory from the past year was watching Lily work with a rescued Mustang that had been deemed untrainable by 3 different professional trainers. The horse had been wild for 12 years before being captured, and everyone said he was too old and too set in his ways to ever accept human partnership, but Lily saw something different. She spent weeks just sitting near the Mustang's pen, talking to him in her quiet voice and letting him get used to her presence. She never forced interaction, never rushed the process. Slowly, the wild horse began to trust her. The breakthrough came when the Mustang approached her voluntarily for the first time. Jake watched from across the yard as the horse stretched his neck toward Lily's outstretched hand. When their skin touched, it was like watching 2 souls recognize each other within 6 months. That same untrainable Mustang was responding to Lily's voice commands and allowing her to ride him bareback through the pastures. The transformation was so complete that visitors often couldn't believe the calm, gentle horse they saw was the same animal that had arrived wild and terrified. "How do you do it?" people always asked Lily. "I don't do anything to them," she would reply. "I just show them that they're safe, and then I listen to what they're trying to tell me. Every horse wants to partner with humans. They just need to trust that we won't hurt them." The success of their horse program had brought financial prosperity to the ranch, but more importantly, it had given Lily a platform to pursue her dreams. She'd been accepted into one of the most prestigious veterinary programs in the country, with professors specifically interested in her unique approaches to animal behavior and diagnosis. Dr. Williams, who had become Lily's mentor over the past 2 years, had written one of her recommendation letters. "In 35 years of veterinary practice," he'd written, "I have never encountered anyone with Lily's intuitive understanding of animal health and behavior. Her disability has become her greatest strength, forcing her to develop senses and skills that surpass traditional diagnostic methods." The scholarship Lily received was specifically designed for students with disabilities who showed exceptional promise in veterinary medicine. The program would provide her with special accommodations and technology to help her succeed, but Jake knew she'd succeed regardless of the support systems available. Nothing could stop Lily when she set her mind to something. As the graduation ceremony ended and families began gathering for photos, Jake made his way to the front of the auditorium. Lily was surrounded by classmates and teachers offering congratulations, but she seemed to sense his approach. She turned toward him with the biggest smile he'd ever seen on her face. "We did it, Dad," she said, using the word that still made Jake's heart skip a beat every time he heard it. "You did it," Jake corrected, pulling her into a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. "I just provided the horses to practice on." That evening, the ranch threw a graduation party that would be talked about for years. Neighbors came from miles around, bringing food, stories, and well wishes for Lily's future. The barn was decorated with lights and banners, and someone had set up a sound system for dancing. Jake found himself thinking about Maria as he watched Lily accept congratulations from everyone who'd watched her grow up on the ranch. His late wife would have loved this girl, would have been so proud to see what she'd accomplished. Maria had always believed that family wasn't about blood relations, but about people who chose to love and support each other. Tommy Rodriguez, now Jake's assistant manager, raised a toast as the sun set over the Montana hills. "To Lily Morrison," he announced, "who taught us all that sometimes the best way to see clearly is to close your eyes and listen with your heart." The crowd cheered and clinked glasses, but Jake noticed that Lily had quietly slipped away from the celebration. He found her in Bella's stall, her arms wrapped around the Mare's neck. Even in her graduation dress, she looked perfectly natural in the barn surrounded by horses. "Everything okay?" Jake asked softly. "Just thinking about how different things could have been," Lily replied. "If you hadn't bought Bella that day, if you'd been like all the other bidders who walked away when they heard about the package deal." "But I didn't walk away," Jake reminded her, "and you know why?" Lily shook her head, curious to hear his answer. "Because Maria always told me that the heart sees things the eyes can't," Jake explained. "That day at the auction, my heart saw a girl who belonged with horses, who had gifts that the world needed." I didn't understand it then, but I trusted it. And now? Lily asked. Jake looked around the barn at the horses that had been transformed by Lily's methods, thought about the ranch that had been brought back to life by her presence, and remembered the empty house that was now filled with laughter and dreams for the future. Now I know that sometimes the most important things in life come disguised as unexpected challenges, he said. I went to buy a horse and came home with a daughter. Best trade I ever made. As they stood together in the barn where their partnership had truly begun, surrounded by horses that trusted them both completely, Jake realized that the giant rancher who had once felt so alone had found something infinitely more valuable than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd found family, purpose, and proof that love really could conquer any obstacle when people chose to see beyond the surface to what truly mattered.